today I'm talking about cat cafes. So I'm often asked if I agree with cat cafes, what my thoughts are on cat cafes, so I thought it would be a nice idea to share this with you guys. So generally, when I first heard about cat cafes, I did have my reservations, in all honesty, and my main concerns were firstly the mix of cats, in that not every cat is suited to a cat cafe. I'm sure most or all cat cafe owners would agree that you can't just take any old cat and bung them in a cat cafe and hope for the best. I've definitely met cats in my time that refuse to live with other cats and aren't overly happy with strangers. So these sorts of cats aren't going to be suited to life in a cat cafe. So I did have my reservations as to how a group of cats would cope in a cafe environment. My other reservation was the behaviour of the people that they would meet. Mainly because, and this is still the case, if you go to a cat cafe and you pay to get in, you want your money's worth. You're not coming out there without seeing a cat, stroked a cat, hopefully cuddled a cat, and really had your cat fill. Especially in places around the world where it's not so easy to have a cat of your own. And I know that perhaps in places like Japan, where it's not easy to have a cat if you live in the cities because the apartments are smaller and it may not be suitable for having a cat, that this is where you get your cat fix. So of course you're going to want to see the cat. So if a cat is minding its own business and doesn't want to interact with a person, and none of the cats at the cafe want to interact with a person, you might find that the people are like, well, I'm going to go and find a cat and I'm going to stroke them. And I've definitely found myself in that situation. I'm like, I don't want to leave without seeing a cat. So I've approached them and I've done that stuff. So these are the reservations that I had. So I have visited a few cafes. There are two nearby me where I've gone just along because they're local and I've just had a look there. And I've been to one in London as well. And generally, for the most part, I was surprised by how well the cats seem to be doing. And I know this is not reflective of all cat cafes, and let me know if you've been to one where the cats definitely weren't happy. But for the most part, the behaviour of the cats was okay. Nothing worse than I've seen in homes, like nowhere near as bad as I've seen in a lot of homes. So yeah, some things that stood out to me is that the setup needs to be good. So the cat cafe environment needs to work for the cats that you've got. So absolutely they need to have a private area where no people are allowed to go. So the one I visited in London had a little cat flap that went through to an area where there was litter trays, where the food was, and where they were able to just get away from the other from the people in the cafe. There was also another room as well, which I think could be opened up as part of the cafe, but while I was there, that bit was closed and the cats could go into that space as well. So this is just so that the cats have choice and they're in control of their interactions, so they can be with the people or they can go off and be by themselves. The same way they can be with the other cats or they can go off to a place where there's not so many around. So that's really important. In the main part of the cafe, it's important as well to make sure this is set up well. So high spaces seem to work really well, and the cat cafes I did visit had tons of high places for the cats to go, and they were being used by the cats in the cafe. So this is great because if it's really high, then it could be a place where a person can't actually reach them and they can be tucked away and they can watch what's happening, they can be around, but they're not actually in the mix. And I think that works quite well. Like if you're in a cafe, it's nice to have a couple of super sociable cats that are coming over and approaching and they're playing with you and they're being lovely, but it's also nice to see the ones that are just around and just observing and they're not totally in the mix. So I quite like that. So definitely high places work well, and places for them to go under, to go and explore, to go round. Lots of resting areas as well. The ones I've seen have had shelving at different heights, lots of beds. That the seating itself was like benches rather than chairs, so the cats could come and sit next to you and settle down and have some nice people time there. So that setup seems to work well, and it works for a multi-cat household. Obviously I know it's not a household, but for there being lots of cats sharing the same space, then these multiple platforms at different heights are absolute game changer in helping them share, because you could have one at the top, you could have one in the middle, one at the bottom, and as far as these cats are aware, they've got their own space and they're not sharing their space with all the other cats, because there is this perception that they are separate even though they're on the same sort of bit of wall. So the cat cafes I visited have had that, and they have worked well, and the cats were using like little bridges and making use of the platforms to jump from one bit to another, so they weren't having to cross the floor to get to where they wanted to go. So this is all really good, and I'm hopeful that every cat cafe takes this on board and has done their research beforehand and knows that that's going to work out really well. Also, what I've noticed is that the people running the cat cafes that I've spoken to, this is a labour of love. They're not in it for the money, which was another concern of mine, that the cats might be exploited and it's a money-making scheme. But for the most part, the people that own the cafes love their cats and are doing it for the passion as well as the money. Like, it is a business, but they have got their cats' welfare at heart, and they do want it to work out, and they do want their cats to be happy. So it's nice to chat to them and to understand where they got their cats from and where it's come from and why they've done this, why they've moved into this sort of industry. So that's nice. Also, I think it's important for there to be rules and regulations and limitations on what the people can do. And again, for the ones I've visited, they did have some set rules that you weren't allowed to do. So you weren't supposed to go and pick the cats up. You weren't supposed to disturb them if they were sleeping. However, I did see this happening. And one lady who scruffed the cat out of their sleeping area and brought them over to the table, which is not ideal. But the staff were on hand to guide people to be doing the right things and to advise them not to do that. So yeah, that's my thoughts basically. I would love to visit more, and I'd love to hear your experiences about cat cafes, and especially cat cafes in other countries, to see if it's any different from here. But my overarching thoughts are that there's tons of cats looking for homes, and there's tons of rescues that are really full with cats that would be suited to the cafe environment. So I think if the owners are doing their research to make sure they get cats that are suited to that environment, and they are going to thrive in that environment and they're going to enjoy themselves there, then that works for me. And the priority is getting cats in homes and keeping them there if they're happy. One final concern is, what happens if a cat isn't happy? Where do they go? Like, what happens if you get a cat and you put them in the cafe and then you realise it's not suitable and they're not getting along with the other cats, or they might be urine marking, or they might be aggressive, and these behaviours aren't obviously conducive to working in a cafe environment, especially if you've got strangers coming in. So I would like to know what happens in that scenario. One cafe I spoke to had a list of fosterers ready to take the cats on if that happened, but surely that's not sustainable. That's not a long-term thing. So yeah, I would like to know more about that. If you have any experiences, let me know. But those are my thoughts. I would love to hear your thoughts too, and I will leave that for today. But have a good day. Love to your cats. Bye. Fig, you totally sat on my notes. You totally sat on my notes, didn't you? Come on then.